Hey guys, this is Entity for Deuces Cracked. In today's video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the simple concept of inducing bluffs. The phrase inducing bluffs is pretty simple to understand. Anytime you choose to play your hand in such a way that your opponent is tempted to bluff, you're inducing a bluff. Usually you do this with a hand that can call a bet, but not bet for value. When you're looking to induce a bluff, you're looking for situations where your opponent will be tempted to bluff because of the board texture. Of course, you also want to ensure that your hand can profitably call versus a bluff. The most common example of this is when you have ace high versus an opponent who has lots of draws in his range. Let's take a look at a hand that illustrates this situation. We're playing 6 max limit hold'em. It's folded to us in the cutoff and we raise ace 3 of clubs. Our opponent, a fairly tricky loose aggressive player, calls in the big blind. Our read on him is that he'll peel the flop light, but he plays tighter on the turn. He also tends to bet when opponents show weakness, and he's capable of waiting to the turn to check raise for both value and with some draws. The flop is jack of clubs, 7 of diamonds, 2 of spades. Our opponent checks, we bet, and he calls. The turn is the 7 of clubs. Our opponent checks. This is a spot where, given this specific type of opponent, we can consider checking behind in order to induce a river bluff. This is a good spot to check behind for 3 main reasons. Now let's walk through why. First, getting check raised sucks. When our opponent has a good hand, we'd really rather not face a check raise. Since he's loose aggressive, he's capable of check raising much more thinly for value than other players are, and he's also capable of waiting to the turn on a fairly dry board texture, which this is. This is a board where our equity is generally going to be low once our opponent check raises, so it's not ideal if we end up having to face a check raise. Second, when we're ahead, our opponent has very few outs. If he has a hand like Queen 10, which he peeled the flop with, his outs are significantly reduced because of our club draw. He's going to have a fair number of hands like Queen 10, Queen 9, King 10, King 9 in his range that he decides to peel with on the flop and decide what to do with on the turn. Because of this, he's actually going to bluff the river fairly frequently. First off, lag players love to bet whenever anyone shows weakness. But this is a situation where, as we said earlier, he's going to have a fair number of busted draws and hands without showdown value that need to bluff the river. We can use this to our advantage in situations like this, when it's close between checking the turn and betting the turn. Since we know he's going to be forced to bluff somewhat frequently, we can turn our hands that have some showdown value into value checking hands on the turn. The key for this is that we want to make sure that our hand has good equity against his hands that he will bluff with, but these are also hands that he might not call us with on the turn. As a general rule, you should be looking to induce bluffs versus players who have predictable river betting habits. Loose aggressive players are great, as we've mentioned, because they have to have lots of bluffs in their range, which makes it easier to profitably pick off the bluffs. Players who have polarized betting habits, this means players who bet only with the strongest and weakest hands in their range, also fall into the category of players you can consider inducing bluffs against, because typically they don't have enough super strong hands in their range, especially on a board texture like this, to make up for the fact that they also have some bluffs. Inducing bluffs is a necessary part of a great poker player's game, but it's important to make sure that you consider all of the factors before you decide to induce a bluff. I've seen many poker players who overuse this play, so it's best to make sure that you're carefully considering board texture, your opponent's range, and your hand. If you don't think your opponent will bluff for whatever reason, checking to induce a bluff doesn't make much sense. As always, if you guys have any questions about inducing bluffs, please post them here in the forums. This has been Entity for Deuces Cracked, signing off.